A life of service and dreams deferred. Sarah Lewis had been working at Ridgeway Diner for as long as she could remember. It wasn't the fanciest place in town, but to Sarah, it was home. The scent of sizzling bacon, fresh coffee, and warm maple syrup was like a familiar hug every time she walked through the doors. She tied her apron around her waist and glanced around the diner, already bustling with morning regulars. The air buzzed with the comforting sounds of clinking plates, silverware scraping against ceramic, and the low hum of conversation. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah called out cheerfully, her warm brown eyes sparkling as she moved through the rows of booths. A chorus of greetings echoed back, making her heart swell. She loved this place, not just because it paid the bills, but because it was her second family. Sarah had always believed in kindness. A single mother with a 10-year-old son, James, she knew firsthand how much a small act of generosity could change someone's day. That belief was what made her notice the man in the far corner booth, a man who had been coming to the diner every morning for as long as she could remember. Jack Thompson. He was a man of few words, his weathered face lined with experiences Sarah could only guess at. His deep-set blue eyes, once filled with unspoken pain, had softened over the years, thanks in part to Sarah's persistence. He always sat at the same table, ordered the same meal: scrambled eggs, wheat toast, black coffee, and kept mostly to himself. "Morning, Jack," Sarah greeted him, her voice as warm as the fresh coffee she poured into his cup. Jack looked up, offering her a small nod. "Morning, Sarah." His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot, but there was a quiet appreciation in it. "How are you today?" she asked, leaning slightly on the table. Jack shrugged. "Same as always." Sarah had learned long ago that Jack wasn't one for long conversations, but she also knew he appreciated her effort. So she stayed a moment longer, pouring him a fresh cup of coffee, before moving on to the next table. As she weaved through the diner, balancing plates of pancakes and refilling coffee cups, Sarah thought about her son. James was the light of her life. Smart, funny, and full of dreams. He wanted to be a scientist, always coming home from school with stories about planets, animals, and inventions he wanted to build. She thought about how proud she was of him, and how much she wanted to give him more than what they had. The apartment they lived in was small, the car she drove unreliable, and every dollar she earned had to be stretched to make ends meet. But she had a dream she hardly dared to speak aloud. Sarah wanted to open her own cafe, a place filled with warmth, community, and the kind of food that made people feel at home. She envisioned a cozy space with soft lighting, mismatched chairs, and the scent of fresh cinnamon rolls filling the air. A place where people could come not just for a meal, but for comfort. But dreams required money, and money was something she never seemed to have enough of. So every night, after finishing her shift at the diner, Sarah worked another job, cleaning offices after hours. By the time she got home, exhausted and sore, James was usually asleep, and she barely had the energy to kiss his forehead before collapsing into bed. Tonight was no different. As she drove home, the old car sputtered, the engine coughing in protest. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, silently pleading for it to hold on just a little longer. But life had a cruel sense of timing. Just as she turned the corner onto her street, the car jerked violently before coming to a complete stop. "No, no, no," she whispered, turning the key frantically. The engine made a feeble, grinding noise before giving up entirely. Panic clawed at her chest. She couldn't afford a new car. She could barely afford groceries this week. Sarah closed her eyes, gripping the steering wheel as she took slow, deep breaths. One problem at a time. Grabbing her bag, she stepped out of the car and started the long walk home. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the diner exhausted, her body aching from the walk and the stress. But she pushed her tiredness aside, greeting each customer with the same bright smile she always wore. When she reached Jack's table, he studied her closely, his gaze sharper than usual. "You look tired," he noted gruffly. Sarah let out a small laugh. Well, you try walking a few miles home after your car dies and see how refreshed you feel. Jack's brows furrowed. Your car broke down. Yeah, Sarah sighed, topping off his coffee. But it's fine. I'll figure something out. Jack didn't respond right away. He simply looked at her, as if weighing something in his mind. You work too hard, he said finally. You deserve a break. Sarah smiled at him, touched by his concern. Maybe one day. Jack was quiet for the rest of his meal, but as he wheeled himself toward the door, he paused. Sarah, he said, his voice carrying a weight she wasn't used to hearing from him. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron. Yeah. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key ring. Her brow furrowed. What's that? Jack hesitated, then extended his hand. This is for you. Sarah stared at the keys in confusion. I don't understand. Jack pressed the keys into her palm, and then with his other hand, pulled out a folded note. Read it when you have a moment, he said quietly. Then, before she could protest, he wheeled himself out of the diner. Sarah stood frozen, the cool metal of the keys pressing into her palm. Her heart pounded as she slowly unfolded the note, her hands trembling. As she read the words scrawled across the paper, her breath caught in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes, because what Jack had just given her would change everything. The key to a new beginning. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the small, folded piece of paper. The diner bustled around her, plates clinking, customers chatting, the faint hum of the coffee machine in the background, but all of it faded as she focused on Jack's note. She took a shaky breath and unfolded the paper. The words written in neat, slightly slanted handwriting made her heart pound in her chest. Sarah, I never thought I'd have a reason to believe in people again. But you changed that. You never asked for anything in return, yet you always gave kindness freely. This key belongs to something I've been holding on to for years, a place that used to mean everything to me, until I lost the will to keep it going. I don't want it to sit empty anymore. I want it to belong to someone who will breathe life into it again. Someone who deserves it. That someone is you. Meet me tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. The address is written on the back of this note. Jack. Sarah's breath hitched. Her fingers tightened around the note as if she needed to ground herself in reality. A key. A place. Jack was giving her something. But why? Her mind raced through possibilities. Had he owned a business before? Was it a house, a shop, a warehouse? And why her? She wanted to run after Jack, to demand answers, but he was already gone. Sarah. The voice of her coworker, Mary, snapped her out of her daze. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Sarah shook herself, forcing a smile. I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind. Mary eyed her skeptically. Well, whatever it is, don't forget to take care of yourself. You give so much to everyone, Sarah. Make sure you're giving something to yourself, too. Sarah nodded absently, but her thoughts were spinning too fast to process Mary's words. She stuffed the note into her apron pocket and held the key in her palm, running her fingers over its worn edges. Tomorrow. At 9 a.m., she'd find out what this all meant. The next morning. Sarah barely slept that night. Her mind was a whirlwind of excitement, nerves, and questions she couldn't answer. By the time the sun rose, she was already dressed, pacing in her small kitchen while James ate his cereal at the table. Mom, why are you up so early? He asked through a mouthful of cereal. Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to tell him anything until she knew for sure what was happening. Just something important today, she said, ruffling his curly hair. Are you all set for school? James nodded, then gave her a curious look. Is this about your dream? Sarah froze, her heart clenching at how well he knew her. She crouched next to him, cupping his small face in her hands. Would you be happy if Mom had her own cafe one day? James grinned, his face lighting up. Yeah, you always make the best food. You should have a place where everyone can eat your cooking. Sarah swallowed past the lump in her throat. Well, maybe, just maybe, something special is happening. James tilted his head, eyes full of curiosity. What kind of special? She smiled softly. I'll tell you soon, baby. I promise. With one last hug, she kissed his forehead and sent him off to school. Then, heart hammering in her chest, she grabbed the note, the key, and her coat, then set off toward the address Jack had written. The past, waiting to be awakened. The address led her to an old part of town, quaint, lined with small businesses and coffee shops, some thriving, some long forgotten. As she pulled up to the location, her breath caught. It was a cafe, an old, worn-down building with faded lettering above the entrance. Thompson's Cafe, Jack's last name. She turned, and there he was, sitting in his wheelchair just outside the cafe, waiting for her. Sarah stepped toward him, her heart thudding. Jack, is this yours? He looked up at the old building, his expression unreadable. Was. A long time ago. Sarah's eyes widened. You own this place? Jack nodded slowly. I built it from nothing. It was my pride and joy. She looked back at the cafe, imagining it in its prime, full of people, the smell of fresh pastries in the air, laughter filling the space. But then the accident happened, Jack continued, and I lost everything. My ability to run this place, my family, my will to keep going. I couldn't bring myself to sell it, but I also couldn't bring myself to step foot in there again. Sarah turned back to him, her heart aching. Jack. He met her gaze, his blue eyes piercing. But you remind me of who I used to be. That fire, that determination. You deserve this place more than anyone I know, and I want you to have it. Sarah's breath hitched. I can't. Jack, I can't just take this from you, she whispered. Jack smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. Sarah, you've given me something I thought I'd never have again. Hope. A reason to get up in the morning. Let me do this for you. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. This wasn't just a building. This was his dream, his life. And he was offering it to her. I don't know what to say, she choked out. Jack chuckled, handing her another piece of paper. Say yes, and sign this. Sarah blinked, taking the paper from him. It was the deed. Her name was already written on it. Sarah looked at Jack, overwhelmed. Jack, are you sure? Jack reached out, gripping her hand. I've never been more sure of anything. And in that moment, as Sarah held the key and the deed to a new beginning, she knew. Her dream was no longer just a dream. It was about to become real. A dream awakens. Sarah sat in the small, dimly lit cafe, the silence wrapping around her like an old, forgotten song. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows, casting streaks of gold onto the worn wooden floors. The faded sign above the entrance still read Thompson's Cafe, though the letters had begun to peel and crack with age. The place had been untouched for years. Tables were covered with a thin layer of dust, chairs stacked in the corners as if waiting for someone to remember them. A faint scent of old coffee beans and memories still lingered in the air. This was her cafe now, or at least it would be. The thought sent a wave of emotion through Sarah's chest. Excitement, fear, disbelief. Her hands gripped the key Jack had given her just the day before, her fingers running over its cool, metallic ridges. She still couldn't quite believe it. Jack had given her this place, just handed it over like it was the easiest thing in the world. But she knew it wasn't easy. Not for him. Jack had built this place from the ground up. It was more than a business. It was his life's work. And then one accident had taken it all away. Now he was entrusting her with his legacy. Sarah exhaled sharply and set the key down on the counter. You can do this, she whispered to herself. But could she? Owning a business wasn't just about dreaming. It was about planning, financing, working even harder than she already did. And she worked hard. Between shifts at the diner, late-night cleaning jobs, and taking care of James, she barely had time to breathe. Could she really take on more? As if on cue, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw Jack's name on the screen. Her heart jumped. She answered immediately. "Jack." His voice came through, calm but firm. "Did you go inside?" Sarah swallowed. "Yeah, I'm here now." A pause. Then, "What do you think?" She looked around at the abandoned space, at the ghost of what once was. "It needs work," she admitted. "A lot of work." Jack chuckled softly. "Yeah, I figured. But I also figured if anyone could bring it back to life, it'd be you." Sarah smiled despite the lump forming in her throat. "Jack, I don't even know where to start." "Start by believing you can do it." His words settled deep in her bones. She wanted to believe. She needed to believe. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about James. About giving him a better life. About proving to herself that dreams were worth chasing. Sarah straightened her shoulders, her resolve hardening. "Okay, I'm doing this." Jack's voice was warm. "That's my girl." A plan takes shape. That night, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, her notebook open in front of her. She tapped her pen against the page, staring at the long list of things that needed to be done. Renovations, licenses, equipment, marketing, finances. The list seemed endless. James sat across from her, chewing on a peanut butter sandwich. "Mom, what are you doing?" Sarah sighed. "Trying to figure out how to turn an old dusty cafe into something special." James scrunched up his nose. "Can't you just clean it?" She laughed, ruffling his curls. "If only it were that easy, baby." James leaned over, peering at her notebook. "What's this word?" He pointed to a line. Sarah glanced down. "Permits. It means I need permission from the city to open a business," she explained. "A lot of paperwork." James made a face. "Paperwork sounds boring." Sarah chuckled. "It is." James thought for a moment, then tilted his head. "But you're still gonna do it, right?" Sarah hesitated. She looked at her son, his innocent brown eyes filled with trust. He believed in her. She had to believe in herself too. "Yeah," she said, nodding. "I'm still gonna do it." James grinned. "Good. 'Cause I think you'd be the best cafe owner ever." Sarah's heart swelled. If nothing else, she had to do this for him. First steps and unexpected struggles. The next morning, Sarah went straight to work. She started by calling the city office to ask about business permits. The woman on the other end of the line sighed. "You'll need to submit an application, have an inspection, and obtain food service licensing. It could take a few months." A few months. Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. She had been hoping for weeks, not months. But she didn't let it deter her. She scheduled a meeting with a licensing officer, took notes on what she needed, and promised herself she'd figure out the details later. Next, she tackled the money problem. She didn't have enough savings to fund the cafe herself. Not even close. She needed a loan. But banks weren't exactly eager to hand out money to single moms with no prior business experience. Her meeting with the bank was a disaster. "I'm sorry, Ms. Lewis, but without collateral or an established business record, we can't approve your loan request." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "I just need a small amount to get started." The bank officer shook his head. "I understand, but without assets to back it up, it's too risky." Sarah walked out of the bank defeated. Where was she going to get the money? As she sat in her car, trying to hold back tears, her phone rang. "Jack." She sniffled and answered. "Hey, Jack." Immediately, he picked up on the sadness in her voice. "What happened?" Sarah hesitated. Then, with a heavy sigh, she told him everything. The licensing delays, the bank rejection, the fear gnawing at her heart. When she finished, Jack was silent for a moment. Then he spoke. "Meet me at the cafe tomorrow morning." Sarah frowned. "Why?" Jack's voice was firm. "Because I have an idea. A new path forward." The next morning, Sarah met Jack outside the cafe, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. Jack didn't waste time. "I figured the banks would be a problem," he said. "That's why we're gonna do this another way." Sarah crossed her arms. "What other way?" Jack smirked. "Community funding." Sarah blinked. "What?" Jack gestured around the street. "This place, this town. People need a cafe like this. A place to gather. A place that feels like home. If we can show them your vision, I guarantee they'll help make it happen." Sarah frowned. "You think people would actually donate money for this?" Jack nodded. "People invest in things that matter to them. You just have to show them why this matters." Sarah bit her lip, considering. She had seen how much the community cared for her, the way the regulars at the diner always asked about James, the way people looked out for each other. Maybe, just maybe, Jack was right. "What do I need to do?" she asked. Jack grinned. "We start by telling your story." Sarah took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, hope sparked in her chest. This dream wasn't impossible. She just needed to fight for it. The power of community. Sarah sat in the middle of the old, dusty cafe, staring at the faded walls and worn floors. Her heart pounded with the weight of the challenge before her. The dream of Sarah's place was within reach, but the obstacles felt enormous. She had no business loan, no big investors, no safety net. But she had Jack. And now, she had an idea. Community funding. Jack had made it sound simple, but Sarah knew it wouldn't be easy. She needed people to believe in her vision, to see what she saw in this rundown little cafe. Could she make that happen? Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her notebook and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "Why should people support Sarah's place?" She tapped her pen against her chin, thinking. People didn't just give money for businesses. They gave money for dreams, for stories. And Sarah had a story worth telling. A story worth telling. That evening, after tucking James into bed, Sarah pulled out her old laptop and started typing. "My name is Sarah Lewis, and I have a dream." She poured her heart into the words, telling the story of a waitress who had spent years serving others, dreaming of a cafe that could be more than just a business, a place where people could come not just for food, but for comfort. She wrote about Jack, how he had lost his own dream, but believed enough in hers to give her this incredible gift. She described the cafe as it could be, the scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries greeting people at the door, a cozy reading nook in the corner, soft music playing in the background, a community table where strangers could become friends. And she ended with a simple plea. "I can't do this alone, but with your help, I can turn this cafe into something special, a place for all of us. If you believe in dreams, if you believe in second chances, please help me bring this cafe to life." She read over the post, her hands trembling. Was this crazy? Asking strangers for help? She took a deep breath and hit post. There was no turning back now. The town responds. Sarah didn't sleep much that night. She tossed and turned, wondering if she had made a mistake. But the next morning, when she checked her phone, her heart nearly stopped. The post had blown up. Dozens of comments. Hundreds of shares. Messages from people she didn't even know. And the most amazing part, donations had already started coming in. Sarah covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. People cared. She scrolled through the comments, her heart swelling. I've known Sarah for years. She has the biggest heart. If anyone deserves this, it's her. Mary, her coworker. This town needs a place like this. I just donated $50. Let's make it happen. I used to eat at Thompson's Cafe every morning before Jack's accident. I'd love to see it come back to life. Count me in. Sarah blinked through her tears. This was real. This was happening. Her phone buzzed, and she saw Jack's name pop up on the screen. You seeing this? Jack's voice was rough, but there was an unmistakable smile behind it. Sarah let out a breathless laugh. Jack, people are actually donating. I told you they would. I don't know what to say. Jack chuckled. Say you're ready to get to work. Sarah wiped her eyes. I'm ready. A town comes together. Over the next few weeks, something incredible happened. People didn't just donate money. They showed up. One by one, they arrived at the cafe. Volunteers armed with cleaning supplies, toolboxes, and pure determination. The first to arrive was Mary, a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. Let's make this place shine, she said, rolling up her sleeves. Then came Mr. Johnson, a retired carpenter, who offered to repair the worn-out furniture. A group of high school students volunteered to repaint the walls. Even Sarah's old diner boss, Mr. Curtis, surprised her by donating an industrial coffee machine. I've seen you work, Sarah, he said. I know you'll make this place special. Sarah could hardly believe it. This wasn't just her dream anymore. It was theirs. The hardest day yet. But not everything went smoothly. 1 week into renovations, Sarah got a devastating phone call. Jack had collapsed. She raced to the hospital, her heart pounding in fear. When she reached his room, he looked frail, his skin pale against the white hospital sheets. Jack, she whispered, taking his hand. He gave her a weak smile. Hey, kid. Tears burned in Sarah's eyes. Don't do that. Don't scare me like that. Jack sighed. Doctors say my heart's not as strong as it used to be. Sarah gripped his hand tighter. You're going to be okay, right? Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her with soft eyes. I just need you to promise me something. Sarah swallowed. Anything. Finish this cafe, Jack said. No matter what happens, you make this dream real. Sarah's throat tightened. Jack, don't talk like that. He squeezed her hand. Promise me, Sarah. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I promise. The final push. Jack remained in the hospital for days, and Sarah poured every ounce of energy into the cafe. She spent every waking moment cleaning, organizing, and preparing for opening day. She ordered new chairs and tables. She hung warm lights and paintings. She made menus by hand. James helped, too, picking out colors and taste-testing recipes. And finally, after weeks of work, it was ready. Sarah's place was real, and Jack had to see it. A promise kept. On the morning of opening day, Sarah arrived at the hospital with a surprise, a plate of warm apple pie and fresh coffee. Jack blinked in surprise as she walked in. What's this? Sarah set the plate down and smiled. The first official meal served at Sarah's place. Jack's eyes shone with emotion. Sarah, his voice broke. She squeezed his hand. I kept my promise. Jack let out a shaky breath. I knew you would. And as he took his first bite of pie, a tear slipped down his cheek, not from sadness, but from pride. A community's heartbeat, Jack's legacy lies on. Jack took another slow bite of the apple pie, closing his eyes as he savored the familiar taste. When he finally looked up at Sarah, his eyes glistened with emotion. This tastes just like I remember, he murmured. Sarah's heart squeezed. I used your old recipe. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. You're something special, Sarah. His voice was thick with emotion. His rough exterior momentarily softened. This cafe, it's going to be something bigger than either of us. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. I just hope I can do it justice. Jack reached out, gripping her hand with more strength than she expected. You already have. She held his gaze, knowing deep down that this wasn't just about the cafe. It was about believing in herself, about finding purpose. And now, thanks to Jack, she wasn't alone in this dream. Sarah sat with him for a long time, watching as he slowly finished his pie, both of them knowing this moment mattered more than words could express. Opening day. The moment of truth. The morning of the grand opening, Sarah woke up with butterflies in her stomach. This was it, the day she had dreamed about for years. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with last-minute details. Had she ordered enough ingredients? Was the staff ready? What if no one showed up? But as she stepped inside Sarah's place, those fears melted away. The cafe was alive. The walls, now painted a warm, inviting shade of yellow, glowed under the morning sunlight. Soft jazz music played in the background, mingling with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm cinnamon rolls. The tables were perfectly arranged, small vases of fresh daisies sitting in the center of each one. The bookshelves in the reading nook were stocked with donated books from the community. The menu, handwritten with care, displayed dishes inspired by her mother's cooking and Jack's old recipes. Everything was ready. She took a deep breath, adjusting her apron as the minutes ticked by. And then, the bell above the door chimed. The first customer. Sarah turned and saw Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who used to sit alone at the diner. She smiled warmly. "I thought I'd come support my favorite waitress." Tears burned behind Sarah's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. Please, have a seat." And then more came. Mary and the other diner workers. Mr. Johnson, the retired teacher. The high school kids who had painted the walls. Soon, the cafe was filled with laughter, conversation, and the comforting clinks of plates and coffee cups. People weren't just ordering food. They were sharing stories. They were connecting. Exactly as she had imagined it. Sarah moved through the space, pouring coffee, greeting customers, making sure everyone felt at home. At one point, she glanced outside and saw a familiar van pulling up. Her breath caught. Jack's arrival. The full circle moment. Jack wheeled into the cafe, looking around in quiet awe. Sarah rushed over, her heart hammering. "You made it." Jack smiled, his voice filled with quiet pride. "I wouldn't have missed this for the world." She guided him to his usual corner table, the same spot he had occupied at the diner. Except this time, it wasn't just a place to sit. It was a place he had helped build. She set a steaming cup of black coffee in front of him, just the way he liked it. Jack took a sip, exhaled slowly, and nodded. "Perfect." Sarah knelt beside him. "Jack, look around. This is because of you." He shook his head. "No, Sarah. This is because of you. I just gave you a push. You did the rest." She looked around the cafe, now bustling with life and laughter. Jack was right. She had done this. She had turned a forgotten dream into a living reality. Jack reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, placing it on the table. It was an old photograph. Sarah picked it up carefully. It was a picture of Jack, younger and standing behind the counter of Thompson's Cafe. His eyes held the same spark she saw in him now, a passion for serving people, for creating something meaningful. Sarah looked at him, eyes misty. "Thank you, Jack." He smiled. "Now go run your cafe. You've got customers waiting." She laughed, wiping the stray tear from her cheek, and stood up. Jack had passed the torch. And now, it was her turn. The future of Sarah's place. As weeks turned into months, Sarah's place became a cornerstone of the community. Regulars had their favorite tables. People came not just for food, but for connection. Sarah hired young people who needed a second chance, giving them their first real jobs. She started a pay-it-forward board, where customers could buy a coffee or meal for someone who needed it. James spent weekends helping in the kitchen, learning recipes and watching his mother's dream unfold. And Jack became a permanent fixture in the cafe. He sat by the window each morning, reading the paper, offering advice when needed, and watching Sarah thrive. One afternoon, as Sarah sat with Jack, sipping her own cup of coffee, he looked at her and said, "You've built something beautiful, Sarah. I hope you know that." She smiled, her heart full. "I do, Jack, and I couldn't have done it without you." He simply nodded, a quiet pride in his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had lost his purpose. Because his purpose had never left. It had simply changed hands. And in the heart of Sarah's place, It would live on forever. A dream worth fighting for. Sarah's place had become more than just a cafe. It was a home. For the community. For those who needed warmth. For those who needed hope. And for Sarah, it was a testament to every struggle she had ever faced and overcome. But dreams don't come without battles. And Sarah was about to face her biggest one yet. A sudden storm. It started as a small leak in the ceiling. Sarah had noticed it one morning, a slow, rhythmic drip near the back of the cafe. Nothing major, just a little water seeping through. She made a mental note to call a contractor, then pushed it to the back of her mind. But by the end of the week, that little leak had become a flood. A storm rolled through town late one night, fierce and unrelenting. The rain came down in sheets, the wind howling through the empty streets. Sarah was at home with James when her phone rang. It was Mary. "Sarah, you need to get down here," she said, her voice tight with panic. "There's water pouring through the roof." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She grabbed her coat, kissed James on the forehead, and rushed out the door. A nightmare unfolds. By the time she reached the cafe, the damage was worse than she imagined. The roof had partially caved in near the kitchen. Water streamed down the walls, pooling onto the floor. The wooden tables she had restored by hand were now soaked and warped. The beautiful books in the reading nook, ruined. Sarah's chest tightened as she took it all in. All of it, everything she had worked for, was slipping away. Jack was already there when she arrived, sitting near the entrance, staring at the wreckage. His face was unreadable. "I came as soon as I heard," he said quietly. Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Jack, what am I going to do?" Jack looked at her, his blue eyes steady. "You're going to fix it." Sarah let out a hollow laugh. "Jack, I barely have enough money to keep the place running. How am I supposed to afford repairs?" Jack exhaled slowly. "You got this cafe once, didn't you?" She stared at him, and then it hit her. The community. They had come together before. Maybe, just maybe, they would again. A town rallies again. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of the cafe, rain boots still splattered with water, exhaustion clinging to her bones. She pulled out her phone and took a deep breath. Then she started recording. "Hi everyone. I never thought I'd have to make a post like this. Last night, the storm destroyed part of my cafe. It's bad. Really bad. And honestly, I don't know how I'm going to fix it. But I do know one thing. This cafe doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to all of you. So I'm asking for help. Again. Because I believe in this place. I believe in second chances. And I hope you do too." She hesitated before hitting post. Then she did. And waited. The response that changed everything. The town's reaction was overwhelming. Within hours, Sarah's post had spread like wildfire. People shared their favorite memories of the cafe. First dates, long talks, moments of laughter over coffee. Donations poured in again. And more than that, people showed up. Just like before, the community came together. Volunteers arrived with tools, hammers, and buckets. Electricians and carpenters donated their time, patching up the walls and replacing the damaged wiring. Local artists painted a new mural in the reading nook, this time a picture of an oak tree, its branches stretching wide, full of names of every person who had helped rebuild. Sarah watched in awe as her cafe rose again, this time stronger than before. And in the midst of it all, Jack, watching, smiling, and maybe, just maybe, finally believing in hope again. An unexpected gift. 2 weeks later, the repairs were done. Sarah's place had survived. The grand reopening was even bigger than the first. People packed inside, their voices filling every corner of the cozy cafe. Sarah moved from table to table, laughing, hugging people, pouring coffee. And then, Jack cleared his throat from across the room. "Sarah," he called, his voice carrying above the noise. She turned, surprised. "Yeah, Jack." He gestured for her to come over. She did. And then, with shaking hands, he pulled out an envelope. "This is for you," he said, placing it in her hands. Sarah frowned, confused. "What is this?" Jack simply nodded. "Open it." She did. Inside was a check. A very, very large check. Sarah gasped. "Jack, what is this?" Jack smiled. "My savings." Sarah stared at him in shock. "Jack, I can't take this. This is—" Jack cut her off. "Listen to me, kid. I spent years thinking my life was over, that I had nothing left to give." He looked around the cafe, his voice thick with emotion. "But this place, you gave me back a purpose." He squeezed her hand. "And now I want to give something back to you." Sarah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Jack, I don't even know what to say." "Say yes," he said softly. She looked down at the check, her hands trembling. Jack was giving her a future. And this time, she wouldn't say no. A new beginning. Sarah used Jack's gift to expand the cafe. She added a small bakery section so she could start selling her homemade pies. She turned the back patio into an outdoor seating area, Jack's idea. She even started a scholarship fund for young kids who needed a helping hand. And at the heart of it all, Jack, sitting by the window every morning, coffee in hand, watching as Sarah's dream flourished. One afternoon, as the cafe hummed with life, Sarah slid into the seat across from him. Jack looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "Taking a break." She grinned. "Maybe." He smirked. "You deserve it." Sarah exhaled, looking around at the bustling cafe. This had once been his cafe. Now it was theirs. And as long as she had breath in her body, Sarah's place would never die. Because it wasn't just about coffee and food. It was about hope. It was about community. It was about a waitress who once had a dream, and the man who helped her bring it to life. The cafe that built a family. Sarah stood behind the counter of Sarah's place, watching as the morning sun streamed through the large windows. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm cinnamon rolls filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of conversation. It had been a year since the cafe reopened after the storm. A year since Jack gave her the check that changed everything. A year since she realized that dreams don't just happen, they're built piece by piece, with love, hard work, and a little bit of magic. Now, the cafe was thriving. She looked around, her heart swelling with pride. Regulars filled their favorite seats. Mrs. Peterson sat near the fireplace, flipping through an old book from the cafe's reading nook. Mr. Johnson, the retired teacher, was grading assignments while sipping his usual black coffee. Near the counter, a young woman sat nervously, tapping her fingers against the table, a first-time job applicant, waiting for an interview. And in the far corner, sitting by the window where the sunlight always landed just right, was Jack, the man who had given her everything. The man who had, in many ways, become family. The news that changed everything. Sarah was in the kitchen rolling out dough for her famous peach cobbler when Mary walked in, her expression unusually serious. "Sarah," she said, her voice soft. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron. "What's up?" Mary hesitated. "It's Jack. He's at the hospital." Sarah's heart stopped. Her hands went numb. The rolling pin slipped from her grasp, hitting the counter with a dull thud. "What?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Mary sighed, reaching out to squeeze Sarah's arm. He wasn't feeling well this morning. One of the customers offered to drive him to get checked out. Sarah's stomach twisted. She didn't even think. She just ran. She ripped off her apron, tossed it onto the counter, and grabbed her keys. Mary called after her. "Go, we've got the cafe covered." But Sarah wasn't listening. She was already out the door. The visit. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and too much air conditioning. Sarah's shoes squeaked against the linoleum floors as she rushed down the hallway, her breath coming fast. When she finally reached Jack's room, she stopped in the doorway, her heart hammering. Jack was sitting up in bed, looking tired but alert. Relief crashed over her like a wave. "Jack," she breathed, stepping inside. He turned his head, his face breaking into a soft smile. "Hey, kid." Sarah let out a choked laugh as she sat beside him. "Don't you ever scare me like that again." Jack smirked, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Not exactly something I planned." Sarah studied him carefully. His face was paler than usual, his hands slightly shaky. "What did the doctor say?" she asked gently. Jack sighed. "Heart's not as strong as it used to be." Sarah swallowed hard. "But you're gonna be okay, right?" Jack hesitated. That hesitation scared her. "I don't know, Sarah," he admitted. "Doctors say I need to take it easy. More rest, less stress." Sarah forced a smile. "So no more sneaking into the cafe before opening." Jack chuckled. "Looks like my days of micromanaging you are over." She squeezed his hand. "Not happening. Jack, you are the cafe. You're not going anywhere." Jack exhaled, looking at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "Okay, I'll fight." Sarah's throat tightened, because Jack had spent so long feeling like he had nothing to fight for. But now he did. A letter from Jack. 2 weeks later, Jack was back at the cafe. He had a special seat now, his favorite window spot, but with a new plush chair and a blanket draped over the back for chilly mornings. Sarah checked on him constantly, making sure he was eating right, resting enough, not pushing himself too hard. One afternoon, as she wiped down the counter, Jack motioned her over. "I got something for you," he said, pulling out an envelope. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Jack, if this is another check, I swear." "It's not." He cut in, smirking. "Just read it." She opened the envelope, pulling out a handwritten letter. "Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I finally got around to writing things down. I never thought I'd find a reason to keep going after my accident, but then you came along. And you reminded me that life doesn't end just because we hit a rough patch. So I want you to know something. I've changed my will. Sarah's place belongs to you. Completely. Every last piece of it. No debts. No strings. Just yours. You're the heart of this cafe, kid. Always have been. Always will be. Make me proud. Jack." Sarah couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. Tears blurred her vision as she stared down at the letter, Jack's handwriting, shaking but firm. "Jack," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You didn't have to do this." Jack reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Yes, I did." She looked at him, her heart aching with gratitude, with love. Jack wasn't just a friend. He was family. And now, no matter what happened, a part of him would always live on in this place. A new chapter begins. Years passed. The cafe continued to thrive. Sarah's place became a pillar of the town. People grew up with it. Couples fell in love there. Kids did their homework in the reading nook. And every morning, Sarah still brewed a cup of coffee for Jack's empty seat by the window. Until one day, that seat wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a little boy. James, now older, taller, and ready to take on the world, sat in the same spot Jack once had, flipping through an old notebook. "What you working on?" Sarah asked, placing a fresh cup of cocoa in front of him. James grinned. "A business plan." Sarah blinked. "A business plan." He nodded. "I want to open my own cafe one day." Sarah's heart swelled. She ruffled his curls. "You know, kid, I think Jack would be real proud of you." James beamed. "Yeah, I think so too." And as Sarah stood behind the counter, watching her son dream, just like she once had, she realized something. Jack's legacy wasn't just the cafe. It was every life he touched. It was Sarah. It was James. And it was every person who walked through those doors, looking for a place to belong. Because in the end, Jack had given Sarah more than a business. He had given her a family. And that would never fade.